Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 111. Thanks so much for joining me after the week off. Looks like we got a pretty good crowd already. I appreciate it. So glad you could be here. Last week we were at the, we call it a poetry day here in Wrightwood, where we took the Wrightwood Art Center, turned that into a poetry venue for the day. We had readings, we had 2 workshops. It was really fun. And reminded me how nice it is to have like live in-person actual events. I kind of forgot, like I'm sort of a, private homebody type person. It was great to get out though and see how much people love community. And it's really interesting that Debbie Kolodji happens to be the poet this week, because she is really well known in this little circle we have in Southern California, because she led the Haiku hike for the Wrightwood Literary Festivals that we had this time of year. We sort of scaled it back for COVID, but it was really fun to do. Debbie would lead people through the woods and talk about haiku. So I'm looking forward to sort of getting some of that, which I never got to do because I was always leading a workshop. So she'll be the guest tonight, Debbie P Kolodji, in just a moment. But first first I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do, so make sure you click the like button. We've got 7 likes over on YouTube and over 20 viewers, so make sure you do click the like button over there. Click it on Facebook too. Click it on Twitter. Yeah, Twitter has a like button, right? Yeah. Click it on Twitter too. Click stuff to let the computers know that you like it, because that's the only way things spread around the internet. Now, today's Poets Respond poem, we're going to start out with about 15 minutes talking about 2 poems. And the first poet we have here is Susan Doble Kaluza. And let's give Susan a call and see how she is doing tonight. Her poem was Last Text from Gabby Petito. But let's give Susan a call. Hey, Susan, you're live on the other. Shut off your stream so it's not confusing with the delay, and then I'll pull you in. Yeah, this is Tim. Yeah, just turn off your computer in the background. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Do you want me to turn it down?
Yeah, turn that down in the background, because otherwise it's confusing. I'm talking to two. Okay. You're talking to me at the present and in the future. So. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, that's really good. Yeah, I was just watching. I just wanted to jump on here and watch you as you started here. So yeah, I'm glad you called, because I've been overthinking this all day.
Have you? How so? What do you mean about that?
What's that?
What do you mean overthinking?
Oh, overthinking, just talking about the poem, reading the poem, all that stuff. Trying not to talk too fast and whatever else. So.
Yeah, that's something I have to do too. I speed talk, and I got to slow down a little bit for the show.
Yeah.
So what? Can you explain a little bit about what inspired you to write a poem about this topic? It's a poem that so many people are talking about. I actually hadn't looked into it too much until we got a bunch of poems about it. And in the process, I read a lot of articles and watched the videos and things like that, just because I was curious after seeing a bunch of poems. And yours was really touching. It's a really moving example of what poetry can do in the face of events like this. So do you want to just talk about a little bit about why you were inspired to write this poem?
Okay. Well, a lot of this I didn't put in the tagline, but I really didn't get as inspired about it as when I looked at the police body cam, and how I really zoned in on how Gabby was acting compared to her boyfriend, Brian. And this seemed just really very familiar. My daughter had been in the same kind of relationship about 3 years ago. And it was an abusive, narcissistic relationship in which she lived through it, but she was strangled in a parking lot in Portland.
Oh, wow.
And it was, yes, and she lived. Mm-hmm. But I saw the character, long story short, when I watched this body cam from the police in Utah, I saw the characteristics of Gabby, who was very much like my daughter, emotionally exhausted, constantly emotionally exhausted, constantly crying. And you notice she also tried to cover for him. She said she had problems, she had mental problems, blah, blah, blah. But what I saw was she's really trying to cover him, because that's exactly what my daughter did for her boyfriend. And we knew, first we thought he was a good guy, and then it was just on and on, emotional abuse and all kinds of stuff. And so when I listened to Brian, when they interviewed him, he sounded like a guy who had just gotten off a ride at Disneyland. And, they had just been, stopped by cops. She was emotionally distraught, and he was like, he's like he was just, oh, no big deal. And so I saw the face of this person that was probably faking it to the people that he was trying to impress, but behind the scenes. And then I began to imagine them in this van going through all these places they went through, kind of in this little tiny space. And it just really, I wondered how much, abusive behavior she had actually endured and what the breaking point was. And so really that was the beginning of, and I think I noticed there was a comment about it being exploitative on your site under the poem. It could have been exploitative. But what this was that I immediately was like bonded with her. And it was because of the experience that I've had directly with a narcissist, abusive behavior through my own daughter, which, if you have children, what they go through, you go through. Okay. So then I continued to watch the police, tapings. And I started thinking I need to let some of this go in a poem, because it was very emotional for me. And I went in to some of the other videos, and the police and the FBI were talking about insects and how if they could figure out what kind of insects were in the area, they could know, how long she'd been in an area and whatever. And it just intrigued me. And I thought, and I'm an image person for poems. I feel like when you put strong images in a poem, it's almost like your mind can go out. And then you can imagine, more lofty things. But if you tie things to the ground and you tie them to concrete images, it just makes it, and it will finally lead you to the story and to the feeling of what you're trying to express in the poem. And it actually just kind of fell out. And also, I am an avid camper. I live in Montana, and I love camping. And we had been camping in some cabins in, I think, West Yellowstone, just about maybe 4 weeks before Gabby and Brian would have been there. Because they went all through the West there, Wyoming, Utah, Montana. And I had for a previous, wrote some previous lines, and I looked up some plants that were in the area in Montana, because I wanted some strong plant images and plant names. And so it turned out the way, and I don't know if these were exactly, of course, the ones where they found her, because they don't know where she was killed exactly, and she could have been drugged to the place she was. But the insects intrigued me. The plant life intrigued me. And I thought her being she wasn't a journalist, but she was a blogger. And she was so into detail. And I thought she would love these details. And she would talk about insects. And she would talk, of course, the insects, and this is kind of dark when she's talking about, or when I talk about it. But the plant life and all that, she would pay attention to. And one of her blogs actually talked about little fat chipmunks, And I know that sounds silly, but that was something that she noticed. And so I did put that in the poem, because I also noticed a fat chipmunk in our campground. And everything about their traveling and the places they saw in the West, which I love, it just intrigued me. And then tying it with my daughter. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get morbid about that.
No, it's okay. And I'm glad your daughter got out safe. That was the thing that I wanted to mention, was that, watching the video, that the shocking thing to me, I ended up, after reading, I don't think it was a different poem who linked to the actual video, but I watched the whole hour-long video, and I if I was just a police officer, I couldn't tell that that was an abusive situation. I would think that, they got a young couple that got in a fight, and she was upset because they'd gotten pulled over, and she was nervous about like either of them being arrested or whatever. I wouldn't have occurred to me that it was that situation. So it's interesting to me that you could have recognized that. And
I think it was my experience with knowing that my daughter was one day she'd be high as a kite, like so excited about this guy, and the next day she would be, literally just broken.
Yeah, so it's really important to like know the warning signs for this kind of thing, because it's just horrific to think that like my daughter could have a boyfriend like that, and I might have no idea. Yeah. Yeah. And
it's hard, Tim, because we really love this guy.
Yeah.
And we welcomed him into the family. We went on floating trips. We went fishing. And I think this is why it's emotional for parents and for mothers especially. I shouldn't say that. It's emotional for dads too. But I'm kind of the counselor in the family, so everybody kind of tells me all their stuff from all angles. But it's hard because when you friend someone, now you think about this guy was befriended by by her family. They, as far as I know, they liked him and thought he was a nice man. These two were going to get married, right? And so to have that, and then to think, and here's another thing I think people don't realize about the story is that these are people that look like they were in love. This, of course, this is the social media kind of tricks us, Facebook putting our best foot forward, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And love. It was kind of a love story. And all girls love this kind of love story. And then to have it end like this, it's just shattering. I think it broke a lot of hearts. And I thought the poem might reach those who were brokenhearted also, because I know that, I think it'd have to be really shallow not to have a broken heart over this.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes sense that you have a personal sort of connection to a similar situation, because that's how you get into the poem and relate. So, while I have so much empathy. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Right. Yes,
okay.
I will.
Okay, I'll put it up on screen. You go ahead and read your own copy.
Okay, sounds good. The last text, of course, is because her last text said she was in Yosemite and it said there was no service there. So we're just going to go ahead and read. No service here, but at least I'm free from the cage bars of my body. Remember what I blogged in observation of birds, chipmunks fattened on the scraps left in abandoned campsites. In the cold after the fires were snuffed out. And the stars, oh, these stars, how they're arranged without number, and how they disclaim the disappearances inferred of them, but instead declare the secrets upon which all darkness preys. Insects I doodled on note cards and sent home already will testify of my whereabouts. Imagine the how, the when, the why, revealed in the character of the dragonfly. I've lain looking up so long, the windswept grass retains the shape of my body. Moonlight is my spine. After the rain, the sky in some parallel agony soaked out of me some heavier silence I'd always felt in the earth and to it, a kind of mooring far more real than the live honeysuckle and wild licorice I could almost smell, and the caddis, with their assorted thoraxes retract into clipped thumbnails and cut grass, their buds. My own body are to the pile of ants, a worthy and contrite fodder. What astonishing weight my own thoughts make at the moment, the unraveling of many ropes set to anchor. Think tie-dyed everything, the clasping pepper grass, and what lies in the green water under algae, what sloshes through the culverts mixed with sand and gravel. Please know I was not gunned down or knifed in half, but cast on a spit. I was spun clay on the wheel of a potter. He created the soul of me. He loved me, then kissed me. He hated me, then kissed me. He kissed me, then hit me. The ocean of him swept over me, a certain undocumented upwelling of all the places we'd been, cheap-shotted and piecemealed up, see. And even here I am writing in my mind that knows nothing, but to feel my heart leap out and breathe into me everything that had died in it before.
Thanks so much, Susan. A beautiful, important poem. I'm so glad you could write that and share it with us.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good night. I'll talk to you later.
You too.
Bye. Yeah, so that was Susan Doble Kaluza with Last Text from Gabby Petito. And we have another poem, too. A Tuesday poem, an extra bonus feature. And let's call up that poet, Selene Frost. Hey, Selene, you are live on the air. Just mute or shut off the stream that you're listening on so there's not two voices. Okay, great. Yes, thanks so much for joining me. So where are you located? You're in Alabama?
Yes, I'm currently in Alabama.
Yeah, well, so do you want to talk a little bit about what this poem is about? People haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's Tuesday's poem. So explain just your background and where this poem came from.
Sure. So I am a general surgeon that works at a large medical center in Alabama. And I was recently recruited to take call at a very rural hospital about 2 hours from any major city. And I got a call a couple of weeks ago, essentially, to drive out to this hospital to help out with some procedures. And what I saw there really sort of brought home a lot of the stuff I'd sort of seen on the news, sort of regarding the COVID crisis and the pandemic crisis in the state where we live. Basically, it was a one-floor hospital, very small, kind of way out there, one of those highways that takes about 15 minutes between exits. And there's a room in the back, and there were just a lot of patients that were laying there that were probably some of the sickest I'd ever seen, ventilated, prone, intubated, and in multiple system organ failure. And I think what people don't realize is that when patients are that sick and in multiple system organ failure, there's a lot of different doctors that need to be involved. There needs to be cardiologists and pulmonologists, and critical care doctors and surgeons. But unfortunately, this particular ICU was being run by one incredibly talented but very overwhelmed family medicine doctor. And he tried to transfer each of these patients out about 10 times to 10 different area hospitals, and there are no beds available for hundreds of miles. So the closest consultants were people like me who were about 2 hours away. So I think I was sort of horrified by sort of the way that the situation has really gotten out of our control. And in addition to that, I was just really feeling incredibly sympathetic to the providers that are really trying to keep these families, these patients and these patients' families like together. Part of the thing that also struck me was I think I felt very frustrated because of how much misinformation there is out there on the internet right now about the vaccine. 96% of American physicians are vaccinated against COVID-19, but there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of conspiracy theories, and people that have lower literacy rates are significantly more vulnerable. And that's sort of the exact patient population that you see in these rural areas. So I wrote this poem basically about my experience.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking. And I have some friends who who are anti-vax, and I've tried so hard to get them on board, and there's just this huge, like backfire effect. Anytime you try to discuss it, it's so hard, but so important as you see it play out in small hospitals all over countries with low vaccination rates.
Yeah, and I mean, the cost of it is people's lives.
Yeah,
unfortunately, It's not, the stakes aren't low. Yeah.
So this poem is a sestina, and what made you write in the sestina form?
So I'm actually a part. I just started taking one of my first poetry classes I've ever taken through like the Lark Song online writers workshops. And there's a woman who teaches, Dr. Maria Nazos, who has a PhD from University of Nebraska, who is a fairly well-known poet, been published in the New Yorker, and she has been leading this workshop class. And the assignment for that week was a sestina. So I wrote it and I submitted it on a whim, and you accepted it.
Yeah, well, it's a great example of the form, and the way the words carry through is echoes. I think it's because you have short lines and long lines that really work well together, and you play with it a lot too. But it's just a wonderful poem, having, poetry as journalism is such a hard, it's a thing that we don't get to see very often. And so seeing a report from the front lines and what you're thinking through really excellent, poetry form is really wonderful and rare. So I just love this poem.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to go ahead and read it?
I'd love to.
Okay.
So it starts off with a quote by Rumi. Where there is pain, the remedy follows. Wherever the lowlands are, the water goes. If you want the water of mercy, make yourself low. And it's an excerpt from the Masnawi. And the poem is called Midnight in the COVID ICU in Rural Alabama, Assistina. How do you spell daughter? She says, her shoulders sagging low over the consent form, her penmanship a treason. I can't write in cursive. My head cocks to the side. Do you understand? I ask. If I lay her flat to do this, she might die. Her eyes are a house with dark windows, stilts buckling under the threat of the wave. Her hand wavers. I think of my own daughter. Sound asleep, hot little hands hanging low, her dreams warm as sunlight. I'll have to strip naked before I come inside. Bleach the blood and sickness off my shoes before I come in the house. I wish it was a new feeling, watching this woman's little son kick the linoleum and put his thumb inside his mouth. I live in a divided house, kicking linoleum an island apart from the grief that falls like waves of fat black flies and maggot daughters swarming a carcass in the lowlands. Is Ma ever coming back to the house? I look over. The sickness seeps from her pores, fetid water from polluted waves. I don't know, I tell the daughter. Her sats are so low, the nurse says. I say I don't know, but by sunrise, she'll be wailing like a beast from the hillside. I walk in the room, bedside. She looks small. Her small dreams, a warm house for her kids to live in. The ventilator charts the waves of her breath. Her daughter makes herself low. Her voice smaller than her son. I make myself low. I seethe in the ransom of my thoughts, crimson, but needless, so needless. I push the side of the scalpel into her thigh. She's the victim of a house divided, the flags diminished, waving in surrender, wondering what will become of the mothers and daughters. I wave sleep aside and mop the floor of the ruined house. The sun hangs low. I drive home to my daughter.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that poem. That was Midnight in the COVID ICU in Rural Alabama by Selene Frost. Thanks so much for sharing that, Selene, and joining us today.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep. Good night.
Bye.
Okay, so now we're going to take a quick break and move on to our main guest today. And, of course, it's Deborah P Kolodji, and we're going to talk about Highway of Sleeping Towns and a whole bunch of other things. That'll be just in a moment. Let me get her on the line, and I'll be right back. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience as we get connected with Debbie. Deborah P Kolodji is the California Regional Coordinator of the Haiku Society of America and former moderator of the Southern California Haiku Study Group. The former president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association, Kolodji is also a member of the Haiku Poets of Northern California, the Yuki Teikei Haiku Society, Haiku Canada, and British Haiku Society, and the California State Poetry Society. She's the author of 4 chapbooks of poetry, and her first full-length book of haiku and senryu is Highway of Sleeping Towns from Shabda Press. She's been published all over the place and does all sorts of haiku, including, like I was mentioning before, she led our haiku hikes at our Write with Literary Festival all the time, which were just the most popular thing we do. The only thing that we did every year because it was just so good. Here she is, Debbie Kolodji. How are you doing, Debbie?
I'm doing fine. It's so great to be with you this afternoon.
Yeah, it's just so great to see you. It's been a long time with it COVID and not having festivals and everything that's going on. It's just really great to see your face.
Yeah, and I missed those Wrightwood festivals. That was fun.
Yeah. People always, they still talk about it. They still ask if we're still going to, do them and things like that. So, yeah, people miss you. So Highway of Sleeping Towns is the book. Do you want to read something from there to start with?
I'll start with that. I'll read a few of the poems from the beginning.
Sure. Just the very beginning.
White marble. I am small at the feet of Lincoln. Summer moonrise. The distance between sea stars shrinking. A bullfrog hits the lower register. Weeping willow song. Floating purple, my daydreams follow the water hyacinth. Train station, the flutter of wings in a chandelier. Highway of Sleeping Towns, the Milky Way.
An excellent series to start out with from Highway of Sleeping Towns, which you can see on the screen here. And of course, you can find it at Debbie's website. So Debbie, tell me a little bit about why you were drawn to haiku in particular. That's always something that I'm always interested in, but why haiku?
Well, originally it started because I thought my poems were too wordy. And so I was trying to learn to be a little bit less wordy in my poetry. And so I started learning haiku and then originally I had the wrong idea of what haiku was. I thought it was 5/7/5, and I didn't understand all the nuances of, seasons and juxtaposition. And then I just fell in love with the form. And people ask me, well, why do you love the form so much? And I always tell them this story. I was on a business trip in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that's near Gettysburg. And someone said, oh, why don't you go by Gettysburg? And I don't know what I thought Gettysburg was, but I didn't realize it was miles and miles of battlefield. And so I drove there after work, and I was walking along and feeling, the sadness and thinking about all the soldiers beneath my feet. And suddenly this haiku by Basho popped into my head, summer grasses, all that remains of a warrior's dreams. And I just stood there in the summer grasses of Lancaster, or Gettysburg, and I just cried. I felt like it was time travel. I felt like I was in that same moment as Basho, and somehow I felt what he felt when he walked on a battlefield, and so that's why I love haiku so much, is the way you feel this connection, how a haiku can trigger a memory, or a memory can trigger a haiku, or a haiku you read, it's back in your brain somewhere, and then you do something like go to Gettysburg and you think of Basho. So that's why I love haiku so much.
Yeah, that's just a great story, because haiku, what it does is it sort of distills everything that poetry does into one tiny unit, which is that connection to another voice and another perspective over time, and the way metaphor creates meaning and things like that are all present in the haiku. And I just love that story about that wonderful haiku by it was Basho, right? You said
Basho, yeah.
Yeah, that's just one of the great ones. And I don't know. Do you remember when you first encountered like really great haiku, like that transition from not realizing, for thinking the 5/7/5 type thing that's taught in school to how haiku really works?
It was in the late 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the late 1990s. I started becoming more interested in haiku, and I strangely entered it from science fiction standpoint is
Oh,
some
really?
of my friends were writing sci-fi coup. And so I started dabbling with sci-fi coup. And one of the members on the list said, oh, you know, we have this group that meets in Long Beach, California. Why don't you come and join us? It's a haiku study group. And I had kids that were still in school, and it wasn't really convenient for me. So it was early 2000s before I could start going. And I met Jerry Ball, who was leading the group at the time. And I just realized that everything I knew about haiku, I just didn't have a complete picture of it. And I just fell in love with it. And we met in a bookstore. So I started buying haiku books, what I could find. And so I bought, the Essential Haiku by Robert Haas, that, translations of Basho and Busan and Isa. I bought the Haiku Anthology by Cor van der Heuvel. And I found in that bookstore an early Red Moon Anthology. And then from the Red Moon Anthology, I started looking in the back on all these different journals. And from then, I just kept reading and reading and reading. And the more I read, the more I fell in love with haiku. And then the more I started writing it. And then I got to the point somewhere in those early 2000s where I almost very rarely wrote a longer poem. It was almost always haiku or a haiku sequence or a haibun or some sort of haiku derivation, because I really loved, this idea of distillation, being in the moment. And I found myself recognizing moments. Like I'd walk around, I'd go, at that time I was working for a cabinet company as the IT database administrator. And I would go walk from the parking lot and go in. And around the time I started writing haiku, I suddenly noticed that there were black neck stilts in this sort of like little riverbed that kind of went through the outside of where the parking lot was. And then I started noticing things like I'd be stuck in traffic on the freeway and I'd see migrating geese. And somehow haiku also heightened my observation and also made me appreciate my world more moment by moment.
Yeah, that's really well put. I mean, and that's what poetry does too. It makes you think about your life in that way and pay more attention and notice things. And it's really, it's enriching in so many ways. And that's another thing that haiku distills is by letting you write very, very small poems that let you live in the moment and capture, that essence of what's going on. The other thing that I love is the community. And there's so many literary magazines that focus on haiku. There's so many groups. And if you're curious, everybody can look in the show notes and see all the places that Debbie's been published. But there's so many, the Heron's Nest and Modern Haiku, and go on. The list goes on and on and on of places that just focus on haiku, including the Frogpond, the ones that are well known, and lesser known ones. There's just so much of a haiku community. And then the Haiku Foundation has its conference. There's just so much sort of connectivity going on. Was that the case when you first discovered it in the 80s, or is that built up gradually over time? What was the sort of, how did it become its own world like it is now?
Well, when I entered into this world in the 2000s, it was established, I started going to haiku conferences. I went to Asilomar, which is the Yuki Teikei Haiku Society in San Jose. They have this annual retreat at Asilomar, which is just marvelous. And I started going there. In 2009, I went to Haiku North America in Ottawa. And so that I started attending Haiku North America conferences. I ended up hosting one on the Queen Mary with Naya. And then I ended up being on the board of directors for Haiku North America. And we have, this year, it was supposed to be in Victoria, British Columbia, but because of COVID, it's going to be a virtual event, and people can still register by August 1st. It's free to go, and it'll be really a wonderful virtual conference. So, but you get to meet people all over the world, and yet I also meet a lot of people in my local community as well. I mean, we have a thriving haiku community locally. And I think part of it is haiku is kind of a communal thing. There was a poet in Northern California, well, he now lives in Washington, who told me once that he literally only wrote haiku when he went to haiku conferences, that somehow being around other haiku poets and talking haiku inspired him to write haiku. So there is this communal aspect of haiku, and also the fact you have to kind of let go of what you've written, because sometimes I'll write something and people see things that I didn't know. Like, for example, I wrote this poem for my father. He was on an oxygen tube the last 6 months of his life. And so his oxygen tube stretches the length of the house, winter seclusion. And my dad would, walk around the house, and he'd put his tube up and down so my mother wouldn't trip on it. And Patricia Mockmiller wrote an essay for Frogpond and used this haiku in her essay. And she talked about the fact that it was a 575 haiku. Well, the funny thing about it is when I wrote it, I didn't realize it was 575 until sometime afterwards. Someone told me, oh, that's 575. Well, it just happens to be because I'm using things like oxygen tube and winter seclusion. They're just long phrases. But it just fell naturally in that form. And so in her essay, she talks about how the limitations of the form kind of emphasize the limitations of the patient on the oxygen tube, and which is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
I wish I would have thought of it, but I didn't. and that's what's really kind of fun, is to see how people interpret your haiku.
Do you want to explain a little bit about that, just for people who aren't used to haiku? I mean, we've been through this several times with other haiku poets that we've had on, but the whole 575 thing and how that's not what haiku is really about. At least in English. Can you just explain that to people who are, who think of haiku as a 17-syllable 575 poem with a nature piece in it? So what is haiku really, if not that?
Well, it's really captures a moment in time, is what it does. I mean, the whole 575 thing is traditional Japanese haiku always had 575 on or sounds. A Japanese sound is shorter than a syllable. So the word haiku itself would be 3 sound symbols in Japanese. But strangely enough, if you were talking to a haiku poet from Tokyo, they may just say hike. Like I would, hike, and so, counting syllables in English tends to get longer than that one breath that it really is. If you ever heard a haiku read aloud in Japanese, it's much shorter. And so the words just are longer, and they also count the punctuation in a sense, the symbols for the punctuation. So, what really makes the haiku is, in traditional haiku, you've got the kigo, the season word, you have a kureiji, a kind of a cut, and then you have a juxtaposition of the two halves of the haiku. And it's just something that's, and there's of course variations, because part of what happens is we get stuck in thinking only about what the Japanese masters wrote. But that's kind of like saying all Western poetry is the way Shakespeare wrote poetry, since Shakespeare lived around the same time Basho did, right? I mean, you need to look at, well, what were our contemporary haiku poets writing? And some of them don't. Some of them write 575 in Japanese, some of them do not. Some of them use kigo, established kigo in their haiku, some of them not so much. So there's some variations. And so basically, for me, it captures a moment of time. It's in the present. It usually has a juxtaposition. The best ones have layers that you could sit with and let simmer. And a lot of people sometimes feel that haiku has to be, what you've experienced. But then, I like to write sci-fi haiku, and that's like, a totally different realm. But yet some of those really have to do with my life. Like I have a book of sci-fi haiku. It's a free download at Title IX Press called Tug of a Black Hole. And I'll just read a few from there.
Okay, let me know where you're starting from so I can show them.
Okay.
What page are you going to be on?
I'm actually just going to read maybe 4 from the beginning and the 2 at the end.
Okay, sounds good. I have it up, so go ahead.
Okay. The tug of a black hole, this isolation. Rocket launch, where the vast blue turns dark. Time travel therapy, a time before this cancer. Shelter in place, the days when I feel like an astronaut. And then at the end of the book, the last whisper from her spacesuit, lost moon. Face masks, my laptop, and safe mode. And so, a lot of it is science fiction-ish, but yet a lot of it could be written about, the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that feels very, very personal. Those poems. Talk a little bit about this idea of making a book. This is Title IX Press. I'm sure people can find it at your website, right? The link to the PDF, because I didn't include in the show notes, but there's a link to your website. So what was it like publishing a PDF book that's free online?
It was a little weird, but I kind of felt, because a lot of these were poems I wrote during the pandemic, and I felt that I just wanted to give something. It was like a gift to the community, right? Mm-hmm. And also kind of because science fiction haiku is not as widely, like, where would you publish it? There's not as many. A lot of science fiction and fantasy presses don't really understand haiku. A lot of haiku presses maybe are going to be less inclined to publish science fiction haiku, mm-hmm. although Lori and Title IX were really, because they like to talk with underrepresented voices. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of worked for me, and I think it was sort of a fun exercise. I mean, the next book I think is going to be a book again, but I did enjoy having it. It's kind of fun to show people because, a lot of friends, it was all kind of immediate. Like once it was online, I got kind of immediate feedback from it, which was kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of a subgenre of a subgenre in a subgenre form or something. So it's really cool to see a book come out that way, and there's just different ways you can publish things. So there's this whole science fiction poetry circle too, which is maybe a good segue into that. What is it that draws you to that, and why do you think it's not? Why do you think it is seen as more of a subgenre, as opposed to having a lot of attention?
I don't know. I've always liked science. I grew up and I like science fiction. I tend to, and I like fantasy. I was in your tribute to speculative poetry with a haiku sequence. And maybe I'll just read that first, and then I'll
get it up on the screen too. This is from Rattle's website. Basho after Cinderella. Go ahead.
Okay. 1. A glass slipper in the middle of the road. Spring rain. 2. Thistles in bloom. Village gossip after the ball. 3. Pumpkin vine. A mouse remembers how to neigh. 4. Fairy dust snow, perfectly sized boots for her bare feet.
And that was Basho After Cinderella from Rattle number 38, if anyone wants to check that out. That was a fun issue to do with speculative poetry all over the place. We had, all sorts of poems about aliens and poems about, fairy tales and all sorts of things. That was really fun issue to do.
I had, at that point in my life, I wrote several Basho fantasy sequences. I had Basho After Cinderella. I had Basho on the Back Road to Camelot. I have Basho Climbs Mount Olympus. Basho discovers the gingerbread house. So it was fun, and so I think part of it is that I find the science fiction and fantasy thing fun. And then I also like science and and sometimes I'll put them together in like the sequences like I did with Basho After Cinderella, but sometimes it's fun to work with another poet interactively in a renge. And I wanted to talk about renge a little bit, but I do have one of the 2 renge I wanted to talk about, Perseverance, really kind of comes out of that whole thing because my love of anything to do with outer space. I've always enjoyed, watching Star Trek, but I also enjoyed reading about NASA missions to, Titan or, always been fascinated by Mars. I've written a lot of poems about Mars in my life. And so this particular renge, and renge goes back to what we were talking about with the community thing, is that you write with a different partner and you have 2 voices. And so I know I would ask you to read this with me. I wrote this one with Billy D of San Miguel, New Mexico. And it won third place in the Haiku Society of America Renge Awards this year. Perseverance. And I'm going to read my verses and then you'll read Billy's.
Okay.
Got it ready?
Yep, I got it ready. Sounds good.
Okay. Backyard bird call. Perseverance lands on Mars.
Blast of solar wind, the dank of withered reeds.
Venetian clouds. A biplane circles the sky above me.
The half moon beta, sipping air, Europa's hidden seas.
Cardinals at the feeder. Snowfall on Pluto.
Kepler's star, the iron in my blood, blood red. Yeah, very nice. Do you want to explain what a renge is, and how how that functions? Obviously it goes back and forth. What are the rules, and how is that different from a renga, which is the thing that it's sort of spin off on? I think, right?
Yeah. Well, renga or rinku is Japanese linked first, and haiku evolved from renku because the hoku, the first verse of a renku, they started doing them as standalones, and they became haiku. Basho was a rinku master, and he would go around and go to different places and lead renku. And renku has a lot of rules. And what happened in the late, over 20 years ago, before my time, before I discovered haiku, so I'm not sure of the exact year, some Japanese poets from the International Renku Association came and made stops in various cities with haiku poet communities, and they led them in renku. And the ones in Northern California, there was the HPNC, Haiku Poets of Northern California, and the Yuki Teikei Society, Haiku Society. And the people from Yuki Teikei understood renku because their founders, Kiyoshi and Kyoko Tokutomi, had taught them how to do renku. The people of HPNC, not so much. And so the thing about renku is there are a lot of rules. So and there's different lengths. There's, case and Rinku, which are 36 links. There might be 100 links. And so you start in a season, you have to be in the particular season. You evolve through the year. You have to have a moon verse here, a blossom verse there. But then you have little weird linking back rules that, like, if you have a mammal in the Rinku, you can't have another mammal. Unless it's a super long one, you can have another one later. So if you wrote a verse about an elephant, I can't write one about my dog because I've already got an elephant, And so I think what happened is the poets who were there got frustrated because they liked the idea of playing off each other, but they just got frustrated with the rules that they didn't understand. Now, the way to get around that is you have a Rinku master who doesn't tell people, oh, you can't have this because I can't have a mammal. You just sort of have people write on slips of paper and you all drink lots of sake or lots of wine. And then you pick the verse and then everybody goes to the next verse, right? And so that makes it fun. It's like a party game. Mm-hmm. But also a Rinku kind of meanders around. And the most fun part about a Rinku is the building of the Rinku. What you end up with is a very long journey of a poem, whereas a Renge kind of is short. It's only 6 links. And you can have it more thematic. You can link back. There's really no rules to it except for that there's 3 lines and then 2 lines. If there's 2 people writing it, 3, 2, 3, and then you switch off so that each person writes 1 second line verse. But when it comes to a 3-person Rinku, then it might be 3 and 2, 3, 2, and 3 and 2. So, but it comes up, and they usually have a theme. And I was going to read one more of my Rinku that I wrote with Billy. This one won first place this year at the HPNC Renge contest. And it's called Wildfire. And it really has 2 themes on it, which we can talk about after we read it, okay? Mm-hmm. You have it ready?
Yep.
Smoky days, the air littered with remnants of our fight.
Watching the house burn, I list my old lovers.
Hillside flames, echoes of angry voices.
Just you and me, little dog. Wildfire.
Sprinkles of rain on the dry chaparral.
Suddenly, between lightning strikes, a double rainbow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
nice. Both of those are really wonderful. How does it go about the composition of it? Do you do this over email, or do you wait until you can get in one room together? What is the length of time it takes? Is it like chess by mail, where you're doing one move and then 3 weeks later you get the reply? How does it work?
Well, it's funny. It depends on your writing partner. It depends on what you're doing at the time. I've written them at conferences where you're actually physically with a person. I've actually went to a garden or something with another poet and written a Renge with them. But what I did with Billy, especially during the pandemic, is we wrote back and forth. She sent me a text message, and then I would send her a response. And they just kind of, some of them would happen over a matter of hours, and then we might spend a week or so editing it to try to make it, smooth it out. But we always play off each other really well. And so it's really kind of fun because it's just like a prompt. Like sometimes, Michael Dillon Welsh has a NaHaWriMo site, and different people take turns prompting, and they have a daily prompt. And so a prompt could be fun for writing haiku because then it loosens up your mind and you start thinking about that prompt. And I think a Renge kind of does that too, because one person writes a verse and there's something in that verse, that you think about that makes you write a second verse. And it's really very satisfying. So I've really enjoyed collaboration. And in fact, I did want to mention another form of collaboration I've been doing is that, and also because of the pandemic, my friend in Tokyo, Mariko Kitakubo, who said she was going to turn in and watch this, I think Billy is watching too. Mariko and I met, I don't know, maybe late 2000s at a Stillmar haiku conference. And we had a reading together in New York City. We had a reading together in Washington, D.C. She's visited me here in Los Angeles. She's visited, our friend Cathabella Wilson here in Pasadena. And I visited her in Tokyo. And she was supposed to come here in the spring of 2020 for a tanka reading, because she's a tanka poet. She's not a haiku poet.
And explain the difference between that, tanka and haiku, for people who just don't know.
Tanka is a little longer. It's in English, it's 5 lines instead of 3, although, some people write 1 line haiku, but that's a whole nother story. But in general, they're going to be like 5 lines. And they tend to be a little bit more lyrical. Tanka means little song in Japanese. And they actually, I think sometimes they're actually even sung there. But they are kind of like a little song. And they tend to be a little bit like, where haiku is a little bit more objective. Like you wouldn't usually specifically say your feelings. You would try to evoke your feelings by the scene. And tanka is a little more subjective. You could have something and you could say how you feel about it, And so it's a little bit more, it's actually easier sometimes for, narrative, English language, lyrical poets to learn tanka rather than haiku, because they don't understand the conciseness, the objectivity. Basho said, don't look at the branch, be the branch. And you try to be the branch, you write as the branch, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think tanka is a little bit easier to grasp. So we started writing these sequences because she couldn't come for a visit and all travel was off and she couldn't come to her April reading here in LA. We started writing tanka haiku sequences. Like I'd send her a haiku, she'd write a tanka in response, or she'd send me a tanka and I'd write one in response. And again, some of these were written in the matter of a day or, 2 days, because she's in a different time zone. So, she might write a verse and go to bed, and then I wake up early in the morning, I read it, and she's still sleeping, and then she wakes up and reads it, right? But we've written about 16 of them now. And they're kind of different, but they also kind of have the short, long, short of a renge, but instead of having 3 and 2 lines, we have tanka and we have haiku, and in her voice and mine. So I thought we'd read this one called Both Sides of the Ocean.
Sure, yeah.
And this was published in Kokako, which is a haiku journal out of New Zealand. Tea for both sides of the ocean, smiling moon.
Sharing time under the Big Dipper, gentle roundness of the horizon.
Was it only yesterday? Cherry blossoms line a graveyard.
Chatting on the terrace, our roses under my sun, under your moon.
I look up through bougainvillea, skies we once traveled.
Clouds come into my teacup and go out. Do they drift from mine to yours? Yeah, those are great too. The connection that, it must have been a thing that have kept everybody in the community going through the pandemic, right? That you could maintain these connections over a distance when you couldn't travel and see each other. It was a really great thing, I think, I imagine.
Yeah, it's been really healing, I think, to be able to, and like that one kind of wrote itself too. It was like I was sitting in my patio with my dog, and I get a little, message, a Facebook message from her, and she says, "I'm having tea." And I said, "Oh, I was going to make tea too." But it was like, afternoon for me. It was morning for her. She was just getting up. And so it was like we were having tea together, except that she was, tomorrow in the morning and I was in the afternoon here. And then we were talking about, like, she sent me a photo of her roses, and I went out to my front yard and sent her a photo of my roses. And then suddenly, I don't know, I think, I wrote a haiku, and then she, wrote a tanka back, and suddenly we had a sequence. And that's how this one kind of came about. And but I think it's something that's been very healing from a poetic standpoint. And I mean, traveling for haiku was something that kind of a luxury, because I used to work in a job where I had a lot of travel miles. So if there was a haiku event somewhere I wanted to go to, I'd go to it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's how I ended up going to Japan in 2019. Well, actually, my daughter and her husband, it was the gift for them, actually, the trip, the airfare. But I wanted to go to a haiku conference in Tokyo, and then I started thinking about, Matsuyama, which is where the haiku poet Shiki was born, and then of course once I got to Matsuyama, then suddenly, I'm going to this hermitage where Santoka died, mm-hmm. and I found myself, there were. I didn't realize how many haiku poets I actually knew in Japan mm-hmm. until I went there. And it was really kind of fun, because what we did is we flew to Tokyo, and then we flew to Matsuyama. We finally landed in Matsuyama at 9:00 at night. And as I'm going out, to get my baggage, I hear a voice, Debbie-san, Debbie-san. And I look through the door, and there's Makoto Nakaishi, who I'd met years before at Haiku North America. I mean, he told me he was going to meet the plane, and I said, "Oh, you don't have to bother." And he's like, "Oh, no." And so he's there, and he's taking us to the hotel. I get to the hotel, and there's another poet. Her name is Yukari Watanabe. And Yukari and Makoto and I ended up going to a haiku bar. And the bartender asked me to write a haiku, and I wrote, together after the long journey, spring moon. And then she made me this drink of, sakura flavored sake with a ice cube that looked like a moon with a little flower in it. And it was the coolest thing ever. An hour after I actually was on my feet in Japan, I'm writing a haiku and getting a drink and sitting around with some haiku poets that I knew, and with my daughter also and her husband, and it was really wonderful. And then we went to visit the Santoka place, and I'm sitting there. There were members of the Santoka Haiku Association, or whatever they're called, I don't know. But essentially, Makoto and I and 3 other haiku poets, and my daughter and her husband, and we're sitting around on the mat, on pillows and the tatami, and they're serving us tea, and they asked me to write a haiku. And so, but they told me that where we were having tea, that was the exact spot of where, Santoka was sleeping and where he died. And so I wrote, tea with Santoka, a bird I don't know calls outside. And it was just like such a unforgettable experience, both kind of going to places where haiku poets had lived before, mm-hmm. Going to Matsuyama Castle and then reading a haiku by Shiki about Matsuyama Castle, going to the Dogo Onsen and reading a haiku about Shiki, about the onsen, about the hot spring. And kind of really walking in the steps where they walked that inspired some of these poems. And so it was almost like a haiku hermitage the whole trip, the whole 16 days I was there. So.
Yeah. I should say, because I haven't yet, though, if anybody has any comments for Debbie, please leave them in the chat windows, and I'll pass them along either on YouTube or Facebook. I'm watching both, so if you have any questions, just ask, and I will pass them along to Debbie. But yeah, I was going to say, like, it sounds like a pilgrimage to me. There's something very, it seems spiritual, and this, like, connection over time and the relationship that it has with your own life. Would you call it, like, a spiritual practice? Like, is there something, I don't know, maybe like Buddhist about it, like a sort of a meditation thing where it's like...
Well, kind of, I mean, I'm not actually a practicing Buddhist, but, I grew up Lutheran and became Catholic, but yet there's this spiritual connection with nature, and it is sort of a meditative state, and it does keep me centered because it seems like it makes, like I said earlier, it makes my life so much meaningful, because it's like if I write a poem, it's like I'm capturing a snapshot in time. I mean, if I take a photograph, like I could have, I did take a photograph of sitting in that Santoka, Hermitage. And I did take a photograph when I was at that haiku bar. But it's the poem that just bring back not just how it looked, but how I felt at that moment of time when I was there. And like I said, it's like time travel. It's time travel to my own life, time travel to others, and a connection to others, a connection to the earth, the ability to look at small details and not get focused in on big world problems, but more on, the small joys of life and the small sorrows of life too. But it I don't know, there is something very meditative and spiritual about it, and I don't quite understand. I don't like to go to the point where, it's a religion and you have to write Zen haiku or whatever. And some people do write Zen haiku, but for me, it's just haiku itself has been transformative, helps me find meaning in my life, helps me remember things I want to remember.
It seems, too, that it's like sort of logging your life in the big book of literature or something. You talk about connecting to Basho at the very beginning with those warriors' dreams. And when you write a haiku, if it's one that lasts, it'll be here with somebody looking back at you 100 years or 200 years from now, maybe, So there's something that, like, part of a chain that goes on that's just really beautiful, too, I think, within the haiku sort of world.
Yeah.
There was one question I meant to ask, and Sherry Grant asked to remind me, but was there a name for that haiku tanka sequence that you're doing?
Oh, the one that I just wrote. Oh, the name for the form?
Yeah, the back and forth. Yeah. Do you have a word for that?
I don't have I've never coined a word for it. I've just written it, like,
Well, you should. Yeah, you should make it up. Now's your chance.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to talk to Mariko and see what she thinks.
Yeah. So,
but I know that Under the Basho, the sequence editor there liked him a lot, and he was writing some. And so I think there have been some people who have been experimenting with him as well. But I do like it. I think it has something of the rhythm of a rimge, but a little longer.
Yeah, I thought there was. I mean, that was a great sequence there. There was something about the pacing that worked really well. I thought too. You mentioned earlier that how many of the haiku poets that you know in Japan, and I always wonder. I'm always trying to get a grasp of, like, how poetry is treated and thought of in other countries. And in the interview with Richard Gilbert, I kind of asked about this too, but I'm still not really clear in my own head, like, how it is. Like what could you compare it to? Like how is haiku thought of in Japan? Do you have a sense of that?
I really don't. Like, Richard probably has a better sense since he lives there. Now he teaches at a university, so he gets more in the students. I mean, I've heard different. I mean, I do know that the poets that I met there, there were some poets I met on this trip. for example, there's a poet in Northern California, Faye Ayagi. She used to be the president of the Haiku Society of America. She happened to be in Tokyo at the time that I was there. So Mariko and I met her at this Milky Way pub, which was a hangout for haiku poets, actually, in Tokyo. One of the owners or something was an officer of HIA, the Haiku International Association. And so I went to this pub and I met all these haiku poets, some of which spoke English and some of which did not. And then there was a kukai going on upstairs. Now, a kukai is a Japanese workshop, which works a little differently because what happens is everybody submits a haiku, and then they're somehow made anonymous, and people vote on them. And the ones that get votes are acknowledged, and then there's usually the haiku, the sensei or whoever's leading the kukai, who also selects the ones that she likes the best. And so while I was at this pub, upstairs there was a kukai going on. And because I was going to be there and I was from Temple City, she told all these, and it was a women's group. It was a group of women haiku poets. She told them all to write a haiku about Temple because I live in Temple City. And so, and then later Faye was scoring the kukai. She had this sheet of paper with vertical lines of each haiku, and she pointed out one to me and said, "Oh, I really like this," and she translated it, right? And so eventually the women all came downstairs and I met them. Most of them didn't know English, and but I posed with them. So I have this photo of me and about 15, haiku poets that all wrote a haiku about a temple because I lived in Temple City, which really made me feel special. It just was kind of cool. What that says, I don't know. All I know is that there's different groups in Japan. I know that it's more commonly written with older women than younger people. That, like, I think if you're over, there's some statistics that if you're over a certain age, it's like a very high percentage of these women write haiku, not just like a percentage that would write poetry in the US, a very, very high percentage. But there's also different haiku schools because there's, the Gendai Haiku Association, which is a lot more modern, there's some that are more traditional. So, and there's also other poetry going on. They have, narrative poet. They don't all write, they write English language, they write in Japanese, narrative poetry that they learned from us, just like we learned haiku from them, So there is poetry. I went to the poetry section in a bookstore, but I couldn't tell you much because I couldn't read most of the books there. I did find one by Donald King that was a kind of a book about Japanese culture that I bought just to buy something from a Japanese bookstore, but it was in English, but I couldn't read the covers. I couldn't. I don't, unfortunately, can't read Japanese.
One of the things I was wondering about was it seems like there are a lot of contests and competitions in haiku. It seems like that's sort of a part of it too. There's different, first place in this thing, and every issue of the haiku, like Modern Haiku, I think, has like an award from the last one, or maybe it's Frogpond that does that. But there seems like a lot of competition sort of thing. But the interesting thing is it always seems to me more good-natured maybe than other. Maybe it's just because I'm the editor and I do poetry competitions, but people seem very upset when they don't win. And like upset about the winners and things like that in a way that feels more healthy in the haiku community, but maybe that's just my imagination. Do you think there's like a healthier way to do contests and things like that?
I don't know. I often forget to enter contests because I'm deadline challenged. I will enter the Rattle prize because there's such a big prize money there. I do occasionally enter Japanese ones like the green tea contest because I think it would really be cool to get a package of green tea with my haiku on it from Japan. Mm-hmm. So I do tend to enter that one every year. It's I don't know how to say that. I mean, sometimes I'll look at the winners of a particular haiku contest and I'll go, I wonder why that one won. Because I think, it's always the judge. It can be subjective. I've also had to judge a contest a few times, which is challenging because I once judged the Vancouver cherry blossom contest. I was one of 3 judges. And, you had to read several thousand haiku and trying to winnow down to the ones you like best. They were all about cherry blossoms, which is the thing that was hard about the cherry blossom contest. I once judged the HSA haiku contest, and that was easier because there's a wider variety of topics. And so I wasn't reading, but it kind of fell down because, sometimes people enter contests who don't really understand haiku. They just see, contest, and they enter it. So I was able to get, my 1,200 haiku winnowed down pretty quickly to about 50, which I winnowed down to about 20, and so, but I certainly never got I was a judge. I didn't run the contest. So I certainly never got a letter that said, why didn't you pick my haiku? So I don't know. But I mean, I think that contests are fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have 2 questions here, or a few questions, actually. The first one is from Don Baird, who I'm sure you know. Don Baird.
Yeah, I do know Don. Yeah. Hi, Don.
He says, he asks, why do people fight so hard for the incorrect 575 form? They seem to refuse to hear the truth about the misunderstandings of the form. So why do you think people are in love with that and can't let it go?
I don't know. Some people get so caught up in it. Like usually when I teach a haiku workshop, most people are relieved that they don't have to worry about it. I always say if they want to do it, that's fine. Sometimes people like Billy Collins says, he likes the discipline of it. But what's odd about him is one of the poems of his you published was not 575. I think it was 557. So as long as, I guess it's okay as long as it's 17 syllables, it doesn't have to be 575.
I think that's what he says. I think he does 17 syllables is his thing.
Yeah, so, he wants to stick with the 17 syllables, There are other people who really, and poets I admire that, and if that's their choice, that's fine. But I was at the LA, book fair, the Festival of Books one year with the haiku booth, and some woman walked in and she picked up one of our group anthologies and she read through it and she said, these aren't even 575. And I just looked at her knowing that was going to be an argument I didn't really want to have at the book fair. So I just smiled at her. But the guy I was talking to who was really into Zen in haiku and Zen Buddhist haiku, and he was looking for a book on Zen Buddhist haiku, and I actually had one. He strangely enough, being this Zen Buddhist guy who I don't even remember his name, he just went after her and started to explain to her why it didn't have to be 575. She got in a big heated argument. She finally stomped off and she said, well, I know what I'm talking about because I'm a published writer. And then she stomped off. And I just looked at her like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, welcome to my world. I mean, literally every time we publish a haiku on Rattle, I get at least 1 or 2 emails. It's not even 575. What are you doing? And I just okay. Mary Torregrossa asks if you have a favorite. You already mentioned the Basho poem that you love, but she asks if you have a favorite poem you've memorized and hold close to your heart. Do you have another one, an example of one that's close to you?
I have one. I sometimes garble it, but I have one that I've always loved, written by San Francisco poet Tom Chico, who died a few years ago. And it is Burial Service, one of the black umbrellas breaks down.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that one because it reminds me of my aunt's funeral, where it was raining very heavily. And it was windy too. So I just think of the sadness. I think of the umbrella breaking down. So I've always loved that one. Another one that I can think of, let me think about it. Something about foghorn. I dip my paddle into the sound, by Christopher Harold up there in Washington. He's in Port Townsend, Washington. And the reason I always loved that one is because I was literally on a ferry over Puget Sound when I read that, because I was reading a book of his haiku at the time. But sometimes I think it's just haiku that for some reason I connect with, but I have always, like I said, loved that Basho poem in particular. There's one that my daughter loves. It's her favorite poem that I also like. I forget the name of the poet who wrote it, but he was an older, was a haiku poet from a few centuries ago. It was one umbrella, the person more in love gets wet.
Oh, I like that. I never heard that before. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's in Stephen Addis I think it's Addis, has a book called Haiku Humor, and it's in that book.
Yeah, that's good. Sherry Grant asked about Gendai haiku. She says Gendai haiku is fun. How is the Gendai style in Japan different from the English definition of a Gendai haiku?
Again, that's more of a Richard Gilbert question.
Yeah.
There are people like Kaneko Chota, and part of it is that, he has this one about fluorescent. He has one about bank clerks that are fluorescent as squid, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, but something about the bank clerks fluorescent as squid, and it's really, I think, about writing about non-traditional subjects, and part of it, Shiki had two main disciples, and one of them kind of became the father of this more traditional style of haiku, but another one kind of played with it a little bit more. So that's how you end up with Santoka, who was a student of one of the students of Shiki or something like that. And, Santoka sometimes is known as Japan's free verse poet, but he's certainly not the only one. And so I think there's just a sort of, there's just different groups in Japan. I don't know how to compare it to English because I can only read translations. I can't read the original Japanese. So that's kind of how I feel on that.
Yeah, the website, I'm not sure if Richard Gilbert was involved in putting this together, but gendaihaiku.com. If anyone wants to check this out, this is, I love this website. There's a whole bunch of poets are profiled here. And just to read one at random. Water of spring, as water wetted, water as is. And that was Hasegawa Kai. And they're just all these poems. To me, they feel more, a lot more surreal and experimental is how I characterize them, at least in the translations.
Yeah, and some of them are. I know we once had a discussion at a Haiku North America about an Amy Tanaka poem, which is something like, Atom Heart Mother in the prefab bathroom, spots of blood. And, you know, the thing is, if you knew that apparently the poet Amy Tanaka was born on the day that that album, Atom Heart Mother, was released. And in Japan, they have these free prefab bathrooms, which are hard to describe, really, but I've seen them. And so it's not as weird as it sounds when you really analyze it from that perspective, but it just kind of comes across to what we think a haiku is a little weird, you know, Atom Heart Mother, you know, in the prefab bathroom, spots of blood, or however it went. And also, that kind of reminds me, talking about Gendai haiku, because there's this, I think Gendai haiku really just means modern haiku. And the Modern Haiku Association, one of the founding members of it was this poet that I discovered in Japan, Hakio Ishida, or depending, you know, Ishida Hakio, because the family name is Ishida and Haku is his first name. But Hakio, he was born in Matsuyama, and so I kind of discovered all of these poets that were born in Matsuyama, and that's why I'm giving a presentation at the Haiku North America on the poets of Matsuyama. But he grew up in Matsuyama, ended up being drafted into the army, got in the 40s, got sent to China, where he caught tuberculosis, and then he came back and was sick the rest of his life. But then he also was one of the founding members and wrote the articles for the organization, the Modern Haiku Association, the Gendai Haiku Association. But he was known for, I can't even pronounce it, something like Nengen Tankyo Ha, which means the traces the struggles of human beings. So his haiku traced the struggles of human beings. And one of his haiku was piercing cold jazz, houses becoming in a row, which he wrote after the war and the American occupation, and how Tokyo was changing after it was bombed out and being rebuilt. You know, all these houses being built in a row, and the piercing cold jazz is sort of a reference to to America, actually, you know, with jazz music. So he kind of wrote things like that. And another one he wrote that I felt could have been written in this COVID time was when he was in the hospital, because he was in and out of the hospital the rest of his life with lung problems. Woolly aphids circle the back gate where corpses depart. You know, so.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is just we need to read more Japanese translations. And one good place to do that is Fayagi has a website called Blue Willow World, and she has a daily translation of a contemporary Japanese poet every day.
Yeah, that brings up something interesting about haiku that's a little different too, is that maybe because it's so communal as a type of writing, that the background and the situation of the poet becomes much more on the front. Like you should know details about the biography to get to understand some certain haiku. So this whole death of the author thing that we kind of have through the academy here is just gone, or just never arrived in Japan. And it actually, you know, historical context matters in ways that maybe they don't always with a American poetry. Let's see. I was going to ask, I don't know, did you, is there anything else you wanted to read? I was going to ask you to finish off maybe with some more haiku from the book, or is there anything else? Like, I'm looking to see if there was something we missed or not.
I can read some more from Highway Sleeping Pounds.
So I wanted to ask before you do about how the book was put together. Is haiku, you know, do you have multiple, you know, if you flip through the pages, I'll put them on screen and just sort of flip through a little bit. But, you know, there are 3 on some pages, and they're one on other pages, and there ends up being this sort of not a lack of monotony or something. Like you don't know what to expect in a weird way, and how much space you have around the haiku seem to matter. For maybe the pacing of it, I don't know, there's something about the variety of that works really well. How do you think about putting a haiku collection together? Like what did these have in common that makes them cohesive? And then about the order and layout, like how do you think of that in terms of a book of haiku?
Well, when I put together the book, it was really kind of a process, because when I first started to put it together, I had this idea that I wanted groupings of haiku, right? That I would put all of my divorce haiku together, and I would put all of my mother's illness and death haiku together, and I would put all of my beach haiku together, and all of these different kinds of haiku that I've written. But when I put that, and I also had this idea that the haiku I wrote in the last 5 years was my better haiku, so I was selecting from that group. And so that I put together a manuscript of the number of haikus that Teresa Maychuk wanted. And I looked at it and I went, because I thought it read kind of boring. So then I went through this process where I took the manuscript, I printed it out, I cut it up, and I pasted them to index cards. And then I went back and we sorted them. The kids came over and we sorted them in piles, like, all of the morning fog haiku. I'd written quite a few morning fog haiku, didn't realize how many morning fog haiku I had. Figured I didn't need more than a couple of morning fog haiku. Hermit crabs, well, probably only one hermit crab haiku. So I kind of went through, got all the beach stuff together, all the divorce stuff together, and kind of like science fiction, science-y poems together. And then I sort of looked at that and ended up pulling out what I thought were my best of my best, that for some reason. And so I called those my anchor poems, and I decided I wanted those one on the page, because I kind of thought that a lot of times haiku books might have one on each page, or they have two on each page, and I thought that was kind of boring. I kind of wanted this pace to be different, like maybe have a grouping of 3, a grouping of 2, and a one. And so I started out with coming up with a sequence of the haiku that I wanted to stand alone for various reasons. Maybe they were too intense, like the one that was the Poet's Respond one I wrote for the mass shooting, remember? Mm-hmm. That was in Rattle, about potted poinsettia, at the holiday party, bullets. And I did that from memory, so hopefully I got it right. But the point is, that is sort of an intense poem, so you can't really put it on a page next to anything else. But then I have other ones like the, Highway of Sleeping Towns poem, the White Marble poem I started up with, I'm small at the feet of income. I've got one about a dozen red roses. She examines the bruise in the mirror. So I kind of felt like some of those really needed to be on a page by themselves. And then what I did is, once I had them, I kind of used my Rinku experience, right? Mm-hmm. That I kind of linked to the poems in some weird way that I didn't even understand. It's just sort of like an emotion of feel, that what felt good. So it became a journey, like on the Highway of Sleeping Towns, this journey on this highway of my life, and visiting memories here and there instead of doing a chronological order or doing a subject matter. It's a order. It kind of became like a Rinku, and and some I put on 2 pages, and some I just felt like the 3 worked together as a page, and I put them together on a page. And that's how I ended up doing it. And then, of course, once I got that basic, I went back and looked at all of my published poems. And I found some really early poems that were really good. That there's this one I wrote, oh gosh, I don't remember when I wrote it, but lingerie, drawer after the divorce skip year. And it was in a magazine, I mean, a newspaper. It was like in a newspaper where a Go Shiki Go or something like was the name of the column or something. And that poem has actually been anthologized more than most of my poetry. And so I thought, because it ended up in a anthology of, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the anthology right now, forgive me. But it's the only haiku in the whole anthology. The rest of the poems in the book are regular, longer poems. And so it has to do with relationships or breaking up or something like that. I don't remember the exact title of the haiku, of the anthology. But so then it's like, well, maybe I should include that one since people like it and it's been anthologized several times. And so then I started looking back at my other, and then I ended up looking at my full range of haiku and taking out things where I was repetitive. Mm-hmm. So I ended up with a wider variety, and pretty much all of, I think there was maybe one haiku in here that was maybe published, posted on Facebook and not published, but they were pretty much all published work, because I ended up having a full book of them. But that's how I put together the collection. It was kind of a fun thing to do. My next book may be different, but that's how, I kind of like the idea of putting things out on index cards and reading through them and seeing how they read together and how they sound together, and that's kind of was the process of putting together that book.
Yeah, well, it works really well. And I read haiku journals sometimes, and usually I just pick and, move around and don't read in order. And reading these in order really feels like a really good reading experience. It worked really well.
Thank you.
Do you want to read a few? I don't know what we're like, start on a certain page and read a few maybe, or?
Yeah, I think I could just read some at the end, maybe.
Okay. And what page are you going to be on?
I was going to start with maybe it should be okay, maybe I'll read starting with 100, page 100. Okay. I'll start with 100 and I'll read to the end.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Winter sea, the rise and fall and fall. What's left of us? Caves on Mars. A lily floats in a bowl of water, bank balance. Blue damselfly on a blade of grass, the quiet before leaving. Whispers in the waiting room, mother's MRI. Taps, all we could say, now said. Silent cannon at Gettysburg, birdsong.
Yeah, great way to end that book, coming back to the first poem. Before we leave it, I know I said we just end with that, but let me ask one more question, because this comes from Soretta Martin. And I think it's a good thing to end on, because I think maybe people will be inspired to write their own haiku. But Soretta asks, what daily habits are conductive to your writing haiku? Is there some way you think about it and engage in that process to be aware and ready to receive thoughts and things like that?
Well, I do various things on various days. During the pandemic, I spent probably an hour every day in my patio, looking at, the watching the flowers grow, essentially, and watching the birds and the hummingbird feeder and such like that. Now that we can get out a little bit more, I've been going on walks at botanical gardens.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to write. Sometimes I write on the spot. I'll sit down somewhere and write. Other times I'll just take my camera and take photos, and then I'll look at my photos that I took and I write haiku based on those photos, or inspired by those photos. I always look at the prompts for NaHaWriMo, and I write them in my writing journal, which I don't have handy to show you, but if I feel like I need a prod, to write, I'll go look at those prompts and just start writing, and see where they lead me. So sometimes I'll deliberately sit down with a prompt and try to write something, or maybe there's a call for an anthology, and there's a theme. There's a podcast called Poetry P, which is run by a woman named Patricia McGuire who lives in Switzerland. And she has a monthly podcast, but what she does is she'll have a theme or she'll have a technique. Mm-hmm. Like she had one recently on yugen, using yugen in haiku, which is, this idea of kind of between the real and the spiritual realm, and so I wrote some haiku kind of about churches and stained glass, and and I kind of came up with some, and she took a couple, but it's sort of fun because I wrote a whole bunch of poems trying to fit that theme. There's another magazine that's visual called Frameless Sky, which is Chrissy Villa, Northern California, does that, and she'll have an artist, sort of like what you do with your Frastics Challenge. She'll have an artist and she'll have a link on her website to maybe, 20 to 30 art pieces by that artist. And then you're supposed to submit your haiku tanka or sharita based on, the number of that piece of art. And then what she does for her journal is a YouTube channel or a CD where she'll have someone compose some music. She'll have the images from the artist and then the poems that she picked. Sometimes she puts them together like a haiku. Sometimes she'll put them, but that's always fun. I always end up with some poems, whether or not Chrissy uses them or not, but I always end up with poems going through that exercise. So I do some of those things because I like challenges. But sometimes it's just I read something, or, something happens in the news, like the whole Renge with Perseverance happened when Perseverance landed on Mars. I was all excited about that. I watched the landing. I had to watch the whole NASA, videos from there. And those end up inspiring me to write things. So I just sort of live my life, and if something hits me, I always have a writing notebook. Like some people write on the computer, some people write on their phone. I actually have a writing notebook, and I literally write. I have it with me at all times.
Yeah. Well, for haiku, that makes it easy because you can have a small notebook, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. But that's just wonderful. Thanks so much for being a guest, Debbie. It's just great to have you on and talk to you about haiku and all the things you're doing.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed being here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a good night, Debbie.
Thank you. Good night.
Yes, that was Deborah P Kolodji, and you can check out Debbie's book, of course, at deborahpkolodji.com. For the people listening on the radio, Deborah is like you'd think, DeborahP, and then Kolodji is COLODGI, deborahpkolodji.com. And this book, Highway of Sleeping Towns, is from Shabda Press. So we're going to take a quick break and then go to open lines. And it's been a while. It's been 2 weeks. So we'll see what you have for the prompt this week. The prompt this week was You've been driving for hours on a long, empty stretch of highway. It's miles and miles of nothing but desert landscape, no rest stops, no gas stations. Just when you're starting to think you'll never see civilization again, a building comes into view. What is it? Write a poem about it. That was your prompt for this week. So share those poems, share news poems, just anything else you published recently and would like to share. Let me show you how to do it. It's right up here. So email the poem first, like right now, to openmic. That's openmic at rattle.com. That way I'll have it and can show it on the screen as you read it later. And then you pick one or the other, but not both. Just one if you'd like to be on Skype. It's Rattle Poetry. Type that into the search bar. Say hello and wave to me. And then I will call you when it's your turn. On the regular phone, you can call me up at 818-850-7727. That's 818-850-7727. Let it ring a few times and hang up. And that's how you get in the call list. And I will call you back within the next 45 minutes or so. And it will be your turn to read. So stick by the phone if you do that. And I'm going to go to a quick break, get everything set up, and we'll be right back. And I'm back. Thanks for your patience. We have a whole bunch of people who would like to share poems. We got Peter O'Donoghue. We have Nivaditas here, Philip Stern, Carla Schwartz, Richard Westheimer, Angela Gartner, Jerry Stevenson. So we'll call everybody up in just a little bit. We have some other poems that came in from Carolyn Codd. Ted Guevara's got one. Carlton Johnson. So we'll see what we can get to. And so the prompt for this week, I didn't write one, but Megan's got one for you based on her prompt. And it is right here. This is Close. And here we go. This is Megan's poem based on the prompt. Close. There are no doors, and the pulpit is gone. Graffiti litters the pews. God is dead. Maybe once a choir of children sang songs here, songs about mercy and flames that burn forever, and the birds listened in the trees outside. Now they build their nests in these eaves, and cobwebs hang like tinsel. But if God lives anywhere, it might as well be here. So come in, kneel on the broken glass, and when the wind comes rushing in full of dust, it will sound a little like a hymn. Not exactly, but close enough. And that is Megan's poem, Close, from the prompt this week. And I'm just having a trouble, I'm having a difficult week myself, or difficult few weeks. I haven't had a prompt poem in a while. I have starts to the poems every time, but things always come up. It's a busy time of the year for me, but hopefully other people have some really good poems too. And let's call up Jerry Stephenson first. Can't remember if, hey, he's on Skype. Okay. Let's call up Jerry Steffens and see if we can get that to work. Hey, Jerry, I got you. I don't see it yet, but I might if you click the camera button, or let's see.
Here. Okay. How's that? No? What do I? Give me something else to hit.
I don't know. We got your voice, though. The voice is loud and clear, but I'm not getting any picture. I just see your face.
Hang on. I'll try one more here.
Okay.
I don't know. Well, we can carry on, I guess. Son of a gun.
We can, yeah. If you want to try it sometime later, let me know. We can test it out when we're off the air. But yeah, it's not working. Sometimes what happens is Zoom, which is one of the reasons why I don't let you Zoom. Sometimes that steals your camera, and then Skype can't access it because Zoom is still running, even though you don't know it's running, which is something that Zoom does. But who knows? But what do you have for us today, Jerry?
Okay, I got one that's called Never World Next Exit.
Ah, and this is the prompt, I assume, with an exit.
It's
Sounds
off your prompt. Yeah, no, I threw a little Canadiana into it because we've had a problem here with residential schools.
Oh,
I don't know if you're aware of it, but this is near and dear to my heart. So I thought if you walked right into one of my slippery slopes on this one. So if you're ready, I can read it to you.
Yeah, go ahead. I have it up on screen right now.
Okay. Neverworld, next exit. This road goes on forever, pushing or pulling the wind by direction of changes of heart. Due to consideration too begging to be on this trek, my guard should have been up, but my visor was down. There's no serpentine drive with twists and curves and bends like a tape measure that didn't retract. It's a yardstick instead. At least $1.20 behind me now. No shirt, no shoes, no service. How apropos. Long as there was gas, like church, why have the service? This is no crusade route. There isn't resolution, no redemption. No, there was crucifixion, more than 3. No one was to help save the children. This road runs 2 ways. A trip to, veiled agreement, a release from, escape. For some of them, remain forever. That's how we find them. Another $1.20 on the odometer. I never see it coming. Then it's there. I don't want to look. Then I sort of see. I'm driving a bus of sorts. My passengers are survivors, mourning parents, families, loved ones. This hopelessness, their destination, built buildings to rise up over the prairies and deserts and life, built to drive down will and culture, residential schools.
Yeah, powerful poem, and of course the topic, in case anybody doesn't know, but those residential schools for First People children. There have been, I think, 5,000 remains of children found.
Yes,
something like that number.
Yeah, it's horrific.
Yeah, it really is. But thanks for writing and sharing that, Jerry.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the call. Great show as always. I'm thinking in haiku now.
Well, that's great. You're better off for it. Thanks, Jerry.
Take care, man.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, yeah. So that was Jerry Stephenson with Never World, Never Exit. Okay, and now we're going to go to, so I have a first-time caller. Carolyn Codd is going to be on a little bit. I'm just telling you, Carolyn, that I should let you know, and anybody else who is new, when I call you, make sure you turn off your stream or mute it so that the delay doesn't confuse you. There's like a 30-second delay as like my video bounces out on the servers, back to other servers, down to Facebook or YouTube or Twitter where you're watching this. So it ends up being confusing if you can hear the show in the background. So when I call, hang up or X out of the video you're watching, then come back later. That's how we do it. So let me go next to, let's see, let's go to Richard Westheimer, who we have some congratulations for him too. But let's, here we go. Let's call up Richard. Hey, Richard, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Tim Green, I'm doing great. Your voice is a little muffled. I'm not sure if that's just on my call or...
I'm not sure. Oh, you know what? Maybe. Let me check something before we... Let me get your video size right first. It might be that I'm using the wrong microphone on Skype. I know I'm using the right one for the actual stream, but maybe... can you hear me well enough?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'll do it after you call, so I don't accidentally hang up. But congratulations, first of all, for being a finalist for the Rattle Poetry Prize. That was so cool to look at the poems and see that 2 of the poems in our top 30 or whatever were yours. I mean, good job, Mr. Westheimer.
Yeah, that was a pretty interesting day.
Yeah.
But I'm appreciative of the way that you read the poems so that can happen. And I'm just so looking forward to seeing the other poems in the issue. And of course, I'll be pretty thrilled to see my name in print.
Yeah. Well, it's just wonderful poems. I really love both of the ones that we picked out of the pile that were yours. And I had no idea they were yours either. It was really cool. It was a fun thing to see, which it often is. Like there's this sort of a private unveiling process because we do the meeting down in LA to pick the poems, and I drive 2 hours back to my home office, and then I go in the database and type in the little number at the top and see who each poem is. And it's sort of a fun, like, oh, wow, look at that. And who's that? And then I like Google the person to see, who it is. It's always fun. So it's sort of a private, I get back at like 10 p.m. at night or something after that meeting. And then all alone in my office, I'm looking up who everybody is. It's a lot of fun. But it was cool to see you on there, Richard. So congratulations.
Well, I really appreciate it. And one of the things that I was thrilled with is the poems are sort of polar opposite. One is deeply personal and the other is so conceptual, and the fact that Rattle can handle both of those is sort of amazing.
Yeah, I did know that they were both the same poet because we have the same number. It's like that there's a number on the top of the poem because I don't want to have two finalists in the same top 10 because then they'll like cancel each other out for the Reader's Choice vote,
Mm-hmm.
So that happened one time, and then I realized, wait a minute, I think it was Courtney Campa who had two poems as finalists one year. And so she might have won if it was only one. So I have to balance that out. But anyway, so anyway, after all that, what do you have for us tonight, Richard?
So I have a little tiny Poets Respond poem and a prompt poem, if there's time for both of them.
Yeah, sure. Is the Poets Respond poem something you submitted, or did you email it too?
Yeah, something I submitted, The Unbearable Attraction of Flowing Lava.
Okay, let me... We should actually probably stick it to one, actually, because it's pretty late. We went a little long on the show.
I'll do the prompt poem, just because that was more fun.
Okay,
which
sure.
I did email.
Okay.
This
is the Ars Poetica, or no?
Yeah, the Ars Poetica.
Okay, I got it here.
Ars Poetica, where poems are hiding. The sun sits overhead, as it has since I've been on this road, which is for so long I forget where I'm headed, or where I've been, or how long my hands have gripped this wheel, or even if it is a road, or just the route made by me and this vehicle moving into a future I make by heading there. Ahead and behind are the same, like I drive on the infinite spine of an infinite snake baked into an infinite expanse of heat shimmer desert. I am first aware of a marker of time, when dust rose like a shadow of stone, sudden like a seiche on a windless day. I drive on blind, perhaps nod off, only awaken to see revealed to me a monument grown from the road, the color of bone. On it, I see an open door, and through that door pours a scene of leaves falling, calling me to leave this endless asphalt and searing sky behind, to walk through where I find a river of poems waiting to be written.
Great stuff. Thanks for sharing that. Ars Poetica, where poems are hiding. Thanks so much, Dick.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Talk to you soon.
Yep, talk to you later.
Bye.
That was Richard Westheimer with Ars Poetica, where poems are hiding. And now I'm going to try the first-time caller. This is Catherine Codd. It does surprise you, too, when I call. Let's see. Catherine, hello. Can you hear me? I think I hear you clicking. Are you there? I heard a click.
Hello?
Hello, yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So
Sure.
where are you calling from?
From Redlands.
Ah, okay, great. Right down the road from us.
I can't find the button to
Do the camera?
to fix the sound
Um,
on the microphone. Or
I don't know. Let's see.
it's yeah. No, I'm not clicking.
Well, we have you clear. Let's see.
But it's doubling the sound for me.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you just you can just tell us about the poem and then read it. How about that? Are you still there?
Okay, that didn't work.
Okay. Well, I fixed my camera or microphone problem. Does that make it better?
Well, I hear too. I hear it double. But
Is it because your stream's still going in the background? Where you're watching?
Maybe.
Yeah, mute that or turn that off. Yeah,
Oh,
I don't hear it myself, but
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Oh,
Okay.
now I don't see me, but that's okay.
Well, that's okay. So you're on live on the air. So what did you want to share? This is a poem. You mentioned that you wanted to share it last week, but there was no show. So what is it that you have to share with us?
Well, it's in response to, it's an anti-war poem, and it was in response to the news about the Afghan withdrawal and the terrible drone strike and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a poem that I wrote some time ago, but I update it every so often because war keeps happening.
Yeah. There's always a way to update it, unfortunately.
So all of that was happening made me think of this poem, and I revised it a little bit, and I wanted to share it.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead and read it whenever you're ready.
Okay, do you have it?
I do. I have it up on screen. You have to read your own copy, though.
Yeah, okay. All right. It's called War Cry. Today again, I saw the Guernica. Last time, New York in the 60s, now here in Madrid. And still they agonize and scream. We protest and shout. They're mutilated. They cry. They die. We protest. We shout. Make love, not war. Stop the war. Learn from the past. Never again. Peace we want. Path we plead. Shalom we pray. And they do talk peace, and some make peace. The peace is signed, and some do keep the peace. But the peace is in pieces, and in between, more war. Let there be peace, we pray. Peace on earth, we say. But about peace, what do we know? What we know about is war, all sorts of wars. Tribal wars, revolutionary wars, gang wars, civil wars, world wars, contained wars, play wars, practice wars. Kids watch war in their living rooms, play war in the streets, and now online. Then they're taught more about war, studying the names, the dates, and the places. Sometimes they even analyze the causes. About war, we gain more and more knowledge. Some ones become specialists in war, making and trading the newest weapons. Others study in a military college, preparing to do the latest in wars. Clean wars, dirty wars, high-tech push-button wars, fast wars, Star Wars, drone wars. But about peace, who has the knowledge? Could we teach peace instead of war? Or is peace too boring? Peace, path, shalom, we say. But about peace we know very little, and still they agonize and scream. We protest and pray. They're mutilated, they cry, they die. And again we plead, no more war, stop the war. And yet about war we learn more and more. But the most important part we've never learned, we don't know how. Will we ever know how to stop it?
Yeah, great poem. Thanks for sharing that, Carolyn. That's Carolyn Codd with War Cry. And unfortunately, always timely. Hopefully there won't be a new reason for it to be updated again soon, but there probably will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Carolyn. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Yeah, so that was Carolyn Codd. And I had the whole show. I had Skype was using the wrong microphone. So it was my, I don't know how, Debbie and the first early guests heard me well enough, but I guess it was fine, but it was using the microphone in my document camera instead of the real one. Anyway, let us go now to Angela Gartner, then we'll go to Nivedita. Let's see. So let's go to Angela Gartner, then we got Nivedita, then we have Peter O'Donohue, if he's still awake. Let's see. I'll leave a little message for Peter. And who else? We have Carla Schwartz is still here, Philip Stern. So we'll get through to some people here too. Okay, but let's call up Angela Gartner right now. And I should say, that was quick.
Hi.
Hey, Angela, you were so quick that I was about to say, just to remind everybody from the decision I made while Richard was on, that we should have a 1 poem limit. So there's a 1 poem limit tonight. But what do you want to share for us tonight?
I know. I'm like, what should I share now? Because maybe I'll share my Poets Respond if that's okay. And then next week I can share my prompt poem because I don't know if I'll have time to do the prompt poem for the other week.
Yeah, it sounds good. So what was this news poem about this week?
This was about Gabby, but kind of from a reporter's perspective. Mm-hmm. When I worked in the newsroom, I'm still a reporter. I'm just like an editor now, and I work for a magazine. But when I was in a daily newsroom, while I covered education, we all had to cover different stuff. So, on the weekends, if you worked the weekends, you had to cover the police beat. Anything that came in, you had to go. And then, if they needed extra help, you would go. And then, and my editor would come and say, hey, something quick and easy. And I would cover whatever he wanted. Mm-hmm. So from a reporter's perspective, I was just thinking about some of the people that I covered, an example of I've covered a man who was missing, and I had to talk to his family, before his remains were actually identified. Mm-hmm. And then, I talked to his father. And then there was a woman who was killed, actually in an explosion. And, I talked to her friends and, family and church. And, I was just thinking that, the police are someone who obviously talks to the family, but, we reporters, we do have to, make that connection with the family. And, for us, I think, you see all the posts on Facebook and social media about her and how, people think it's heartbreaking. And to me, I was just thinking about the reporters who had to cover this, and then also had to connect with the family, because we do carry that with us. Because I still remember those stories, and those were years and years ago.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, let's hear this poem. It's 1051 missing person. Is that the police? Yeah, that's the police number, right, for a missing person?
Yeah, and each city has its own one. And so I was always by the police scanner, like that was my desk. So I would always hear the police scanner. And this particular, is not specifically about Gabby or someone I covered, but it was actually it's inspired by an incident that happened here in my state recently about a woman who was missing. So
yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. 1051 missing person. Static, crackle, click. At my desk in an empty newsroom, there was a woman who was found in the trunk. Static, crackle, click. 18 days of waiting, she made one worried call. If you don't hear from me, static, crackle, click. Talk to the police, confirmed. Her pastor says she was loved. The family is at her home. Static, crackle, click. An uncle answered the phone. What can I say to her mom? I hear her orphan children in the background. Static, crackle, click.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Angela. That was 1051 missing person. Really interesting to hear the journalist perspective. I have a question for you, which is kind of personal a little bit to me. But here in the town, I'm just wondering if this is a normal thing that happens, because something strange happened 2 weeks ago in our little town. There was a woman who was thrown, according to a witness, out of a car, and she died. And she was like already dead or something. The coroner came, and there was a witness, and there were other people that saw it in our town, right? On the police report, it says it was a car accident, but there were no cars. And the one news story says that there was a fatal car accident, but people saw the person thrown out of the car, and then the car drove away. And so no one knows any idea what happened, and we're all very confused about it. Did the police ever like not tell the story while the investigation's going on, so that they don't ruin the investigation or something? Is that what it could be, or what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, if it's an ongoing investigation, they might not give information. When you make the police calls, honestly, they're not very forthcoming. That's why we have the scanner. And sometimes you have to find things out on your own because, when you make the police calls, they're like, anything going on tonight? No. When maybe there was a barn fire that just happened. Sometimes they don't want to say. And even with Gabby's.
I was going to say that the family has a GoFundMe and says it was murder, and they're trying to pay her funeral bills and stuff, but the police just say it was an accident. So I find the whole thing, I don't know, I've never seen anything like that happen before.
Well, and it's the reporter's job if there was witnesses, and it just depends on what information the police. I mean, the one thing is sometimes it's hard, the poem that was written today for the Rattle, which was a wonderful poem, very imaginative. But as a reporter, I have a little hard time, putting out information that, we don't really know their situation too much. So I'm like, we don't know all the specifics. And even the fact that they're not, I mean, who knows, the autopsy might be in, but they might not say because they haven't found the guy yet. So, they really don't want to give out the cause and that kind of thing because they still need to talk to him first. So I always cringe a little bit, not just because, and I think that hinders my poetry a little bit for Poets Respond because I don't want to be, it's hard.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for that perspective, Angela. It's really interesting, and thanks for sharing that poem.
Okay, and thanks. And Selena's poem was really good. And haiku, I didn't know it was such a market. I'm going to look. So, all right. Take care.
Have a good night.
You.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
That was Angela Gartner with 1051 Missing Person. And he's still awake. Let's call up Peter O'Donoghue. It's like 3 a.m. there in Ireland or something, but he's still awake. Peter, how you doing? Peter, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. You're live on the air. We don't have video yet, but we have audio.
Okay. How do I get audio? Hang on now. I'm clicking things.
Well, we have your voice. Your voice is loud and clear. And if you want to click the camera icon, it's between the red hang up button and then there's a mute microphone button. There's a little camera should be. If you click that, you should come in. But if you don't, we have your voice anyway, which is fine.
Maybe that's a blessing, Timothy. To be honest.
So what do you have that you wanted to share with us tonight? Oh, there you are. Hello, we see you now.
Good. Thanks. I keep missing the prompts, and that was a brilliant prompt. And I have a lovely poem actually. Well, I think it's a lovely poem about that prompt, but I don't have it. So I've just my latest poem kind of thing, and I'd like to read that. And it's just I've been visiting a graveyard lately with my dog because we can get to it across fields and it's a lovely walk. But I've become a bit obsessed with it, so I do apologise. And what did Charles Dickens say? He said in was it A Tale of Two Cities? It is the best of times or the worst of times. This is probably either the best of times or the worst of times to admit that I'm not a fan of haiku.
Well, that's okay.
I do apologize.
Did you gain any appreciation during the show? A little bit, maybe?
I enjoyed it because I just love Rattle and everything. But I have to confess, and I think I'd be a fraud if I didn't confess.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
I am the president of PAH, P-A-H, Poets Against Haiku.
That's
so
funny.
I feel very, very conflicted, but I just had to confess, mea culpa.
Well, we always appreciate the honesty, Peter.
But I'll shut up and read my poem, will I, Timothy?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, it's called Do This Now. It's only words. They are only words, not sticks, not stones. Today, also, I should explain, we have red kites here in Wicklow in Ireland that are birds, large raptors. They feed on carrion. So I'm not talking about red kites like children's toys. Sorry, it's a red kite as a bird. Sorry. Do this now. It's only words. They are only words, not sticks, not stones. Today I saw a large red kite perched on a tombstone in Kilbride Cemetery. How it took off because I arrived must mean something beyond the beauty of the flap and heft of wings and body. They took the Earl of Wicklow's coffin for the lead, the scrap value. Children used to play among the dead until they sealed the vault. The field abroad full of black upright beans, 70 acres or more. Me on my bike, my dog alongside, and a rabbit scurrying home. Skies as big as a dream above us, a murmuration not of starlings, but swifts or swallows, fleet, delicate precision. Another kite half a mile high, bothered by a persistent crow, harrying, chasing, reminding. All messages I refuse to know. Not yet, not now, later.
Excellent
Thanks
poem.
very much, Timothy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Love that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Peter.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. There's Peter O'Donoghue and with his Do This Now. And love that ending there. Let's see. So, yeah, wonderful picture of that walk across the field with the kites. I loved it. And then the ending, too, and the metaphor that it works. That was Peter O'Donoghue, and that is PB Magazine that he runs out of Ireland. So it's cool to see him staying up late enough to catch the Rattlecast live. Thanks for that, Peter. And now, let me see. Let's go to... I think I'm going to do a little run. Let's see. Let's call up... we got Nivedita, we got Philip Stern, we got Carla Schwartz, Joyce Stull. I think, Joyce, since you just have a haiku, I'll read your haiku in a minute and not bother connecting because it's really short to do that. And let's call Philip Stern, see if he's still here. Then we'll go to Carla Schwartz. Then I'll read some poems, and that'll close out the night. I think that'll be good.
Hello.
Hey, Philip, you are live on the air. Just turn that down in the background.
Okay.
Okay, so how are you doing tonight?
Good, thank you. I learned a lot today with that haiku stuff. I mean, all I knew about it before was the usual 575
Yeah.
and the Imagist poets that copied it, but yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm glad maybe you can write a little haiku yourself later. So what do you have to share with us tonight?
Okay. It seems whenever lately when I'm looking at the Poets Respond poem, I keep playing with my wordplay poems.
Yeah.
They always, they seem to trend toward social commentary. So at any rate, this relates to 2 weeks ago, there was a headline, 7 more U.S. Capitol riot defendants plead guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the headline, and this is my poem, The Guilty.
Okay, go ahead. I have it up for everybody. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay. Every week in the nows, we learn that more and more of our fellow countrymen have pled guilty. Many have said they were just following a precedent. In fact, caught up in the mad gromment, excitedly ignoranting after a fiery spur-reach, what we saw was a stampede of mistaken messalts. Yet instigators and perpetrators go free.
Oh, that was fun. Thanks for sharing that, Philip. I love the ignoranting. That was my favorite part. That's great. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thanks as always, Philip.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Yeah, that was Philip Stern with The Guilty, and one of the wordplay poems. Let's call up Carla Schwartz, and then I'll just read a few. So, Carla Schwartz, here she goes. Hey, Carla, how you doing tonight?
I am good. It's a great night. And Yeah, I'm glad to be here tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join in. And what do you have to share? This is a poem. It's published online at capeandislands.org.
Yeah, it's their radio station. It was published in 2019. Mm-hmm. But when I thought about the prompt, and I'm not living in a desert area, but I love the way Megan interpreted the prompt, her own prompt. That's the best. But anyway, I thought, well, it sort of fits in. So it's called Forsythia Drive-By. And here it goes.
Okay.
As I turn the curve on a lonely road, just past the bridge over the river, a man in camo stands in the lane where I would drive. In his hands, pointed right at me, the blunt end of a black barrel. And as I approach, I wonder if this is how it ends. Or should I stop just short of him or skirt around when he lifts the barrel away from me? And I see it's not me at all he wants to shoot. An owl high in a tree, not caring how close I am, he aims his camera up as I drive by quietly. In front of each house I pass, yellow wands blow me away.
Excellent poem. I love that. That was Forsythia Drive-By, and it does fit the prompt very well. Thanks, Carla.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim, and have a great night.
Yeah, you too. Okay, that was Carla Schwartz, and that was from capeandislands.org, and you can listen to this too, Carla, reading it as well. Interesting publishing opportunity there that they have. I like that. Arts and Ideas is what they call this segment, I guess. Okay, so we're gonna have to wrap up the show in the next 10 minutes. So I'm gonna try to cruise through a few of these other open mic poems. I mentioned we had Joey Stahl has a haiku. Let me just put this over. I don't want to try to avoid showing people's email addresses. Oops. Here. Try this again. I don't know if this was written just now or during the show, but Joy has a haiku inspired by the prompt, and so here this one is. There we go. Highway 56, endless Kansas high desert, Dollar General. Highway 56, endless Kansas high desert, Dollar General. That was Joy Stahl's poem for the prompt. Thanks for sharing that, Joy. Wonderful haiku there. And let us see who else we can share. This is Vicky Miko. And as always, she has some... I'm not going to play it. I'm just going to read. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just going to read it because it'll be quicker than me setting it up. But this is... she has photos and a poem here to go with it. So sort of a photo log journey. This is interesting. So let's do this really quick too. Here we go. This is California couple missing. Last seen traveling east toward the event horizon. We had expected to reach Las Cruces for lunch before noon. Too busy talking about the game theory and food chain. We hadn't even noticed the last car we passed was a couple of hours ago. Must have made a wrong turn somewhere. Yeah, should have been closer to White Sands by now. In the distance on our left, we approach what looks like some kind of holding tank, a massive black vasculum jutting from its flattened, empty space. The highway ends, turn back, scrawled on the K-rail. We notice a sudden quiet. It becomes so intense, it starts to hurt our ears, and there's no air. We are numb. Something's pulling inside my solar plexus. Did you feel that? Between the blue and the mountaintops, we rise from our sightline. In the rabid heat, a gassy jet encircles our now powerless bodies. No time or sense to comprehend what's happening. In slow motion, we begin to levitate toward the massive adytum. Our throats make no sound. We try to reach for each other, but we feel nothing. Our eyes are fixed only on the blackest black, radiating from the open doorway. The taste of warm blood fills the back of my throat. I try to scream for you, but nothing comes out. A sudden dizzying over the threshold. Where are you? I can barely hear your broken voice ricocheting against my last bit of air. Wake up, wake up. A fourth dimension, what we don't know in the miles of nothing. We are just specks, sucked into the vanishing point. And that was Vicky Miko with a Haibun and Haiga. And actually, now I know, that was one of the questions I didn't get to was Vicky's, and she asked if there's something you could call, or if there's somebody who combines haiku and haiga, or haibun. Haibun is the prose with haiku attached, and then haiga are pictures with haiku attached or included as part of it, and they sort of talk to each other, and that combined both. So if you're watching later in the podcast, or if you're listening later in the podcast version, go back and check out the stream to see these photographs by Vicky. And we're going to do a couple more really quick. This is Carlton Johnson, Near the Border. Here's Carlton. So I got to get the kids to bed, unfortunately. I got a lot of content this show. Here's screen view. Near the Border by Carlton Johnson. By 8 a.m., the sun is clearly burning hot, mad that you even have the gall to be out at this early hour. It is only increasing, the heat, unceasing and melting water-like liquid in ruts and rills, and it fills the air with a heavy gasp, scorching your lungs on each inhale. There is a long adobe house there on Old County Route 405, close to the Mexican border. You stop and wander around the back in the shade and add some water to the parched ground. There is an old wooden door on the back, and so you nudge it a bit inside a one-room schoolhouse, complete with a desk, blackboard chalked with a lesson in the ABCs. You leave and re-enter the slaving hot sun, off to learn a few more lessons of your own. That was Carlton Johnson with Near the Border. And let me see. As long as this is short, we'll read Ted's too. Yeah, Ted's isn't too long either. So this is Ted Guevara, or Ted Bernal Guevara, with Last Car. And then we'll do the Sciku, and I got to head out. Here's Ted Guevara's Last Car. The pull is equal back here, but life is less rushed. The self still goes forward, but transfixed moves with it. They both find a rhythm. They forget suddenly. The will back here is to be up front, but sigh on rails overwhelms try on rails. Composure doesn't yearn for dignity. Ideals are deleted once gone by. I am sitting quietly. Quintessence sits across the aisle, wanting to eat with me. The tug is between cars. It catches my breath. It catches everyone's breath. The ghost or thinness overtly roams overhead. But quintessence is with me, reads me poetry, describes me the window, sings me a song. So I'll die alone. And that was Ted Guevara's poem. Thanks for sharing that, Ted. Interesting as always. Last Car by Ted Bernal Guevara. And let's see. So, I'm just going to have to wrap it up here with a quick Sciku. And the Sciku this week was based on an article from the University College London, and this was predicting a riot. Social inequality leads to vandalism and experiments. And so what they did is they had two teams of people play this game called Park Life, in which you try to build a park. You build up your park kind of like a roller coaster tycoon was back when I was a kid. And they were competing to build the best park. And in half of the group, they made the people have an unfair advantage. They just got resources faster so could make a better park. And through a series of 19 experiments, they fiddled with all these things, with all these participants, and found that it was actually social inequality that was what was causing the people in the unfair group to act out and vandalize their opponents' parks. And it reminded me of the way that graffiti is all over the hikes that we do here up in the mountains of Southern California. And in the root cause of that, but also that the graffiti is nothing new to the trees that live on, unfortunately, live on paths that make good date night paths. So here is my Sciku really quick. This is over the heart, carved in an old oak, new graffiti. Over the heart, carved in an old oak, new graffiti. And that is your Sciku for tonight, just a quick one. And to finish off, the prompt for next week is going to be this. Here we go. To Autumn by John Keats is one of the most highly regarded poems in the English language. It is richly majestic and descriptive. Write your own ode to autumn. And that's a perfect poem for the fall coming, at least for those in the Northern Hemisphere that are listening right now. So write your own ode to autumn is the prompt for next week. And next week's guest is going to be Marissa Davis. Marissa Davis is in the Appalachian Poets issue that we just published over the summer. Her new chapbook is My Name and Other Languages I'm Learning to Speak. Just a wonderful poet. Really looking forward to that. Rattlecast number 112. That's the regular time, Sunday, October 3rd, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And hope to see you then with your prompt poems and all sorts of good stuff. Looking forward to it. And let's see you in the critique of the week and everything else, too. In the meantime, have a good night and talk to you soon. Good night.